A Hell of a Spring Break by Weill. A monster wave rushed the shore to meet its end on the lava rocks, throwing a great plume of spray up to a towering altitude. Higher still, at the top of the cliff, a killer trembled with anticipation while dragging an unconscious woman to the edge. By the grim light of the moon, the greedy maniac drew a freshly sharpened blade and sliced the victim's neck from ear to ear, then gripped the glinting knife with two hands and plunged it into the woman's chest, moaning and drooling with ecstasy while ripping her torso open from sternum to pelvis. When not another iota of pleasure could be gleaned from the cruel, perverted act, the North Shore thrill killer rolled the corpse off the cliff and sauntered back home, rejoicing in the afterglow. "Some people actually take time off during Easter week," Tony Park grumbled. "I'd rather be flying to San Felipe to party with 1,000 hot-bodied co-eds." "Wouldn't we all?" Jeff Walker replied dryly from the adjacent seat. The guy's broad shoulders and plate-sized knees knocked into each other repeatedly, so at first they vied for position with sideways glances and jerky agitation. But they finally contorted themselves into the least inconvenient position for the duration of the 6-hour flight, in seats sized for children, agreeing that neither one would enjoy the comfort of the 1-inch armrest. Park slouched in his seat and pulled his cap over his eyes while Walker, about to crack open a new thriller novel, looked everywhere for a button that would recline his backrest. There wasn't one. It was insult added to injury. "I can't believe I have to send you jokers to Hawaii on my dime," Lieutenant Malloy had grumbled 1 month earlier, feigning annoyance when in fact he'd handpicked his protégés for the popular exchange program. "You'll be living it up with the ocean safety officers, that's what they call lifeguards there, during the first week of April, while I'm stuck behind this desk up to my ass in paperwork." Malloy was downplaying the danger involved, but only because he knew Park and Walker were well aware of it. At that time of year, the tail end of the Hawaiian surf season, killer waves such as are never seen in California would still be hammering the North Shore of Oahu. Park and Walker didn't carry much luggage since their work uniform was a pair of shorts. Each with a backpack on his shoulder, they waited for their ride at the curb outside baggage claim at the Daniel K. Inouye International Airport. Park, a former Navy SEAL who kept a habit of situational awareness, was the first to spot an island out in the distance just past the mouth of the harbor. For a moment, his eyes rolled up and right as he searched his photographic memory. "Sand Island," he quoted. "A U.S. Army internment camp in World War II. By September 1945, it held 1,010 Koreans, 952 Italians, and 53 Nazi prisoners of war." "Koreans?" Walker repeated. "You guys supported the Japanese." "Yeah, but it was only 'cause we had to," said the other, waving to a pickup that pulled to a stop at the curb. "Imperial Japan occupied Korea from 1900 to the end of the war." "How's it?" said the driver, hopping out to let them in. "I'm Rick Weiss." He was tall, about 30, thin but with broad shoulders, dark hair, and a long, straight nose. Park and Walker shook his hand and slid into the rear bench seat. As Weiss merged into traffic, the guy in the passenger seat turned around and extended his hand. "And I'm Eric Anzavino. We're your partners for the week." Anzavino's blonde mane looked much like Walker's, but it was even longer and more deeply sun-bleached. He wore a white t-shirt and a thick layer of lip balm. Once they hit the highway, Walker gaped at the lush, hilly scenery zipping past. Weiss caught his eye in the rearview mirror and said, "That view never gets old, and I've lived here all my life." The local waterman drove them straight to their posts. Weiss and Park patrolled Sunset Beach on ATVs, while Walker and Anzavino supervised the action at Ahakai Beach Park, home to the famous Bonsai Pipeline, or Pipe for short, where some of the world's most prestigious surfing competitions are held every year. For Walker, it was a dream come true. Years earlier, he'd made the finals at Punta Zicatela, the Mexican equivalent of Pipeline, but he'd always been short on cash or too tight-fisted to squander his money on an expensive trip to Hawaii. He liked Mexico better anyway. That's where he was born and raised. Later that afternoon, ocean safety officers Bob Culver and Millie Haukea jogged up from Haleiwa on their break, stopping to shake hands with their new colleagues. Both were fit and friendly. At the end of the shift, Walker and Anzavino, the blonde guys, plodded over to the next beach north, Parks and Weiss's area of responsibility, where over 100 locals had gathered in a row. They stood parallel to the shore, in awe of the setting sun, its scattered rays beaming through the cotton candy clouds in perfect alignment, and they marveled at that blazing ball's reflection running toward them on the glittering sea as a warm wind caressed their brown-skinned bodies. "They don't call it Sunset Beach for nothing," Rick Weiss said, nodding up at the parking area where a van had just pulled into a parking spot. A strong, suntanned man hopped out and gestured for them to come to him. "Captain Victor Lager," the newcomer said, offering a strong Hawaiian handshake. The North Shore's highest-ranking ocean safety officer reminded Walker of Lieutenant Malloy, friendly, yet unquestionably in charge. Lager went on to give them a general idea of what to expect for the week. And when the conversation inevitably turned to surfing, Walker let it slip that he had a fair amount of experience in that regard. Park groaned out loud, but Walker knew his friend was ready, having taken him down to Ensenada many times. The local guys immediately invited their new colleagues to an early morning surf session the very next day. "So we'll see you bright and early, yeah?" Lager asked as he prepared to leave. "And don't forget about the party on Wednesday. It's at my house. You won't want to miss that." Again, the senior lifeguard clasped palms and thumbs with Park and Walker in a vigorous Hawaiian handshake. Then he hopped in his van and disappeared into a tunnel of dark green vegetation. "Let's get you guys set up," said Weiss, leading everyone on foot across the sparsely traveled coast highway. The foursome followed a trail past a couple of well-built houses to a small cottage with a covered porch, on which 4 surfboards were arranged on a rack near the door. "For your use," Anzavino said to Park with a doubt-laden smirk. Weiss showed them around the 2-bedroom unit, making sure it was fully stocked with everything they needed. After answering all their questions, he and Anzavino flashed hang-loose signs and sauntered back to Sunset Beach. For dinner, Park and Walker ate fried shrimp noodles from a local food truck. Their bellies full, they sprawled out on sofas in the living room before turning in for the night. "Check this out," Walker said, pointing to an article in the newspaper, which he handed to Park. A front-page photograph showed a formation of lava rocks at the base of an 80-foot cliff, where, according to the report, the bloody remains of a murder victim had been discovered. The article read as follows.
"The North Shore thrill killer has hit our community once again and remains at large as local authorities investigate a string of 5 vicious murders committed in the last 3 months. Anyone with information about these crimes is asked to contact Major Bonamassa of the Honolulu Police at—"
"Good," thought the thrill killer, setting aside a separate copy of the same publication. "I could use the challenge. They got the kill count wrong, though. It's actually 7 in 4 months." On Wednesday evening, Park clinked his beer bottle into Rick Weiss's brew as they leaned over a railing at Captain Lager's party, surveying the scenery gathered in the living room. "I can't believe how well you guys did out there," Weiss remarked, eyeing the extraordinary array of talent milling about on the ground floor. "Walker, especially." "Huh," Park replied. "You thought we were going to eat it on the reef." Weiss gave an embarrassed chuckle and busied himself with his drink. "Yeah, Walker grew up surfing," Park continued, "and he's shown me a thing or two." Whether due to Park's status as a novelty or for some other reason, he noticed that the scenery was beaming at him, one of them in particular, who left her friends to climb the stairs and join them on the mid-level landing.
"Hi,"
she said brightly.
"I'm Kate Harris."
Her flowing auburn locks and sparkling hazel eyes were engaging, but her rock-solid body and that honest-looking smile sealed the deal. As she and Park were drawn together like a couple of magnets, Weiss stepped away with a quick upward nod and a sporting grin, off to fish in other waters. The backyard was more like a front yard, with a fenced-in garden and a gate that opened onto the beach. Under a black velvet canopy strewn with diamond dust, and the romantic ambience of the waves washing ashore, it was in that fragrant garden that Walker was engaged in a fascinating conversation with Millie Haukea, one of the 2 fit and friendly ocean safety officers who jogged up from Haleiwa on the day he'd arrived. Before long, they settled into a love seat, moving on from small talk to more personal themes. "I'm super jealous that you were born and raised here," Walker gushed. "Do your parents live on the island?"
I was 12 when my mom died,
Millie said.
and I never knew my father.
"Me neither," Walker told her. The young woman's sun-toasted features showed an alluring blend of Polynesian and Northern European ancestry, such that her skin was dark but her hair was blonde. His eager gaze followed the line of her neck, down to a tattoo in the center of her upper chest. Before she could catch him staring, he averted his eyes and made casual reference to the previous day's surf session, while very uncasually hoping to get a better look at that tattoo later with no clothes in the way. Back inside, Bob Culver, the other fit and friendly lifeguard who had jogged up from Haleiwa, stood behind the bar taking obvious pleasure in his role. Tall and wiry, Culver resembled Captain Logger but in a younger and more jovial presentation. "Anyone thirsty?" he bellowed over the music, raising a blended margarita in each of his hands. Set on the bar before him were a cutting board with a chef's knife, a plate of salt, and a neat row of limes. Culver's lips curled into a wolfish grin as he found himself surrounded by attractive female coworkers. A short time later, an ear-piercing scream from the back of the house produced a heavy silence. Captain Logger leapt up from the sofa and rushed down the hall to his own guest bathroom, flitting his gaze between the two parts of Cesar Allen, a 15-year veteran of the lifeguard towers. Allen's headless corpse lay chest down in a crimson puddle, his blood still trickling out of his severed neck, and a chef's knife was buried in his back, contributing to the viscous red mess that would take Logger hours to clean up and disinfect. The second part of Allen, his gray-blue gape-mouthed head, floated in the toilet, staring back at Captain Logger with vacant eyes. The next morning, Major Jake Bonamassa of the Wahiwa Police admitted Sergeant Aulani Wyans into his office with a nod and an irritated scowl. Wyans, a broad-shouldered Polynesian 10 years Bonamassa's junior, dropped into a wooden chair on the far side of his boss's desk. "Nice of you to come in, Wyans," Bonamassa chided his top patrol sergeant. "I was expecting you last night." "Sorry. Just flew back from Maui," said the massive Hawaiian, offering no further details. "What's up?" Major Bonamassa was sure that the officer sitting across from him, who sometimes played fast and loose with the rules, but only when necessary, had a good reason for his unscheduled trip and for his vague explanation, so he let it go for the time being. "Looks like the North Shore thrill killer again," he replied. "But what bugs me about it, even more than usual, is the crime scene. It doesn't match the others. Not quite. Forensic analysis indicates that Cesar Allen, the victim, was strangled before his head was severed." "Hang on, boss," interjected Wyans, furiously scribbling notes on a legal pad before he looked up. "If the guy's head was cut off, there'd be no way to check for strangulation." Bonamassa frowned and shook his head in disappointment. Wyans was a solid street soldier, but his experience with forensics was sorely inadequate. That would change in a hurry once he made detective. "You'd be wrong anyway, Wyans," he replied. "But especially in this case, and I'll tell you why. The victim's throat was cut from ear to ear, very high up on the neck before the knife was crunched all the way through to the back. Here are a couple of photos, where you can see the typical neck abrasions. But either way, you forgot about petechial hemorrhaging and swollen tongue and oropharynx," Wyans replied glumly in embarrassment, handing back the gory images and the crime scene report. "As I was saying, his head was severed very high up on the neck, so CSI shows strangulation as the cause of death, while the tox report tells us he ingested flunitrazepam, the date rape drug, shortly before his death." Wyans nodded. "Reminds me of a series of frat house murders at Manoa, back in 2013. Victims were all male, all given flunitrazepam, then led to a secluded location and strangled manually." "Exactly," said the major. But Wyans' jaw fell slack as he turned his palms up, questioning his boss again. "So what makes you think it's our guy? Or gal, I guess. All of the previous victims have been female." "It's a good question," Bonamassa admitted. "I agree that the perpetrator is most likely male, this time at least, since women don't usually butcher their victims and almost never behead them. But keep in mind that most of the female ocean safety officers have muscles like men. What makes me think it's the same person? Take a look at this. Bonamassa passed his sergeant a handwritten note contained in a transparent plastic bag.
Stay away from me, Bonamassa, or you're next. The North Shore Thrill Killer.
Kate Harris was the first of the partygoers to come in for questioning. Shown into the interview room by the desk officer and invited to sit by Wyans, she took her seat while stifling sobs and wiping tears from her cheeks. After confirming a few basic details, Major Bonamassa asked, "Were you and Lieutenant Allen close?"
Yes.
Ms. Harris answered in a shaky voice.
Cesar and I were in a relationship for 2 years, but he dumped me for Millie Haukea. But I didn't do it. I swear to God.
Bonamassa hiked his brows. "Is that so?" he said. "Can anyone vouch for your whereabouts at the party?"
Tony Park.
Ms. Harris answered, but then she hung her head and wept, preventing the lawman from gaining any further useful or comprehensible information. When they interviewed Park, who had just arrived that week, and was therefore not under suspicion for any of the previous killings, the Californian confirmed that he had, in fact, been with Ms. Harris for most of the evening, though he also said she had excused herself to go to the bathroom, and he remembered being frustrated at the excessive amount of time she'd spent at the back of the house.
Yes, Cesar Allen did have a lot of enemies.
Millie Haukea told the police, looking them in the eye as she spoke.
He wasn't easy to get along with. So we only went on a couple of dates before I called it off.
"Did you see anything unusual at the party?" Sergeant Wyans asked.
Yes, I did, officer. Bob Culver ran to the back of the house a few minutes before the scream.
Culver, the bartender, was the next person of interest to come in for questioning. The tall and wiry lifeguard protested his innocence with a remarkable amount of conviction. "Yes, I did rush back to the bathroom," he explained in response to the obvious question. "But it was only because I'd had a lot of beer, and I was in a hurry to get back to the margaritas and the girls." "You didn't see a dead body in there?" Bonamassa asked. "No." "What about the knife?" "I left it on the bar. When I got back, it was gone." "Can anyone verify that?" By the end of the day, all of the margarita drinkers had reported that, to the best of their knowledge, there had been no chef's knife left on the bar when Culver hurried back to the bathroom. Captain Logger was the last possible suspect called in for an interview. The host of the party, he detailed what he'd done and seen from the stalking of the bar 2 hours in advance, to the arrival of the first guest, the piercing scream, and his discovery of the 2 separate parts of the victim. "Is there anything you can think of that might help us get this guy?" Major Bonamassa asked his friend, having known Logger since they were kids on the east side of the island. Logger screwed up his mouth in concentration. After a moment, he shook his head, as though he'd either come up with nothing or didn't want to betray his employees' trust. "If anyone can, it's you," added Sergeant Wyans. "You know your staff better than anyone else." Captain Logger hesitated for a beat, then gave a single determined nod. "Well, it might not mean anything, but Cesar said Kate Harris was stalking him after he left her for Millie." "Stalking him?" Wyans asked, scribbling a note on his legal pad. "Yeah, you know, too many phone calls, endless texts following him to the city, stuff like that. And if I were you, I'd call in Rick Weiss to ask him about a fistfight he and Cesar had just a few months ago. They both said it was nothing, and that they'd shaken hands afterwards, but now I don't know what to believe. That's all I can think of." "Thanks, Victor," said Bonamassa. "Thank you, Brada," the lifeguard captain replied on his way out. "Anything I can do. Aloha." The following morning, Jeff Walker and Eric Anzavino were patrolling the coast on jet skis when they spotted a stranded swimmer who, it turned out, had dislocated his shoulder and couldn't propel himself in any direction. Anzavino dove in and towed the kid back to his jet ski. Then they raced the patient to the beach and helped him crunch his mangled joint back into place. After work, many of the ocean safety officers met at an aquatic complex in Waikiki to practice diving, and of course they invited Park and Walker to join them. Walker was beginning to suspect that the Hawaiian lifeguards looked forward to subjecting the San Diego Howleys to a terrifying series of tests every year. Fortunately, he was a water guy, more than ready for any challenge they could throw at him. To prove it, he went first, his heart pounding in his ears as he climbed up to the 10-meter platform. Charging forward, he jumped and planted both feet on the edge while throwing his arms over his head, executing a double front flip with a half twist. As he pulled himself out by the ladder, Millie handed him a towel, her dark Polynesian body stretching out a red one-piece in all the right places. And there was that tattoo again, a square subdivided into 4 smaller squares in the center of her chest. Very interesting, Walker thought, mostly due to its location.
Nice,
She said.
I could never master that one. Hey, do you want to go out for drinks later?
Of course, Walker wanted to go out for drinks later. As they agreed on a time and place, their attention was drawn by Captain Logger, the next person to climb up to 10 meters. The man took measured steps to the edge, stopped, looked down at the water, leveled his gaze again, then drew a calming breath and threw his arms up and back while launching himself into 1.5 backward somersaults while traveling forward. With his eyes on the pool, Logger unfolded into a back dive at just the right time, slicing clean into the water. When he surfaced, he grinned and gave his colleagues the shaka sign. They all burst into rowdy cheers and whistles, Walker included. He'd be working on that one when he got back to San Diego. Several other guys and gals performed respectable stunts off the lower boards, but Park and Kate showed no interest at all. Not in that activity, anyway. They sat across from each other at a picnic table, holding hands, fully engrossed in a private conversation. Farmers and beach lifeguards have at least one thing in common. They rise with the sun, so everyone had to get to bed early. Slinging their bags over their shoulders, most of the ocean safety officers filed out through the turnstiles and headed to the parking lot, where they wished each other aloha and drove off in their cars. Among those that stayed behind was the North Shore thrill killer, who claimed to have forgotten something. An hour later, this individual was relaxing in front of a television, viewing live footage of the aquatic complex as it burned to the ground. "Bro, look at this. We were just there," Park exclaimed, watching the news as he cuddled with Kate Harris on the sofa. Walker came out to see. "At least the pool's safe," he quipped. Park slid his laptop out of his backpack and fired it up.
What are you doing?
Kate asked, snuggling closer to peer over his shoulder. "I'm Googling all the lifeguards," Park replied distractedly. "Except for you, of course." "You're right to check, bro," Walker said, returning to the mirror and his efforts to untangle his hair. "Once in a week might have been a coincidence, but that's twice now we've been with them when a major crime was committed. But I gotta go. Millie's waiting." Walker grabbed his keys off the counter and rushed out the door. "See ya, Kate," he called out over his shoulder as his sandals flip-flopped down the front steps and he hopped onto one of the motorcycles they'd rented for the week.
He's going out with Millie? Kate wondered aloud.
"That's weird. She already has a boyfriend." Park typed in Millie's name along with a few other keywords, then spent some time scanning pages and pages of text as Kate continued to watch the news. "Check this out," he told her after a while. 10 years ago, Millie's mom was found dead from an overdose on Velzeland Beach. That woman's father, Millie's granddad, was a German prisoner of war at Sand Island. A Nazi. Park's blood froze as he came to the chilling realization that Millie's square tattoo had once been a swastika, and his heart pounded with alarm as he reached for his cell and hit the button for his best friend. A ringtone blared by the bathroom mirror. Walker had forgotten his cell. Park went back to his laptop, found the number for the Wahiwa police, called Bonamassa, clicked off and said, "Stay here, Kate. I'll be back." Then, just as his best friend had done, he flip-flopped down the stairs and jumped on a bike, hoping he wasn't too late to save him. Millie Haukea and Captain Victor Logger sat across from each other at a small square table in a fancy bar on the top floor of a hotel.
I thought you'd be happy,
she said, pouting theatrically. "I'm only into women," Logger growled. "You know that,
Tell you what,
she said, her features brightening.
I'll take care of Walker, and then we'll go somewhere else to pick you up a female.
Logger's eyes came alive as Millie looked down through the window at the parking lot.
He's here,
She said quickly. Logger headed out to the balcony while she went to the bar to order a beer, then slipped in a tablet of the date rape drug she'd crushed into powder beforehand. When Walker strutted through the door, Millie shot her hand into the air to draw his attention.
Hey you,
She cooed, rising to hand him the bottle and to greet him with a very friendly hug. Hey yourself, Walker replied smoothly, allowing himself to be led to a booth just outside the restrooms. It wasn't long before his eyelids grew irresistibly heavy, and he started nodding out.
let's go to the bathroom in case you have to throw up.
She said, speeding him out of sight. Out on the balcony, Captain Logger's jealous eyes locked onto his girl, leading Walker to a back room. Just like a slut at a strip club, he muttered, then followed them inside. Logger's eyes fell down to the floor where Millie was strangling Walker with both hands, but that's not what he perceived. He saw a cheating whore straddling his rival, her eyes alight and her lips parted in arousal. He drew back a closed fist and whacked her one on the side of the head just as the door flew open behind him. "Police!" shouted Major Bonamassa and Sergeant Wyans, storming in with their service pistols at the ready. Captain Logger darted past the lawman and out the door before they could fire. At the far end of the barroom, a large and furious Tony Park was covering the front doors, so he swiveled his gaze every which way, desperate to spot another exit. He didn't like what he saw, but it was his only option. Spinning on his heels, he fled in the opposite direction, through a door and up a flight of stairs. As Logger burst out onto the roof, he slowed his pace, filling his lungs with the sweet warm air of his birthplace for the last time. Then, just as he'd done on the 10-meter platform, though now he stood at triple that height, he strode to the edge without breaking stride and launched himself horizontally, his arms spread like eagle's wings. Tipping forward gradually, as he gained a terrible amount of momentum, he brought his arms together as if he were about to slice cleanly into the pavement below. His last thought was that he'd have to be more careful next time. Millie Haukea was arrested and her DNA tested. When it matched the trace evidence left on the frat party victims years earlier, she confessed to everything with the hope of a lighter sentence, that Captain Logger had in fact been the North Shore thrill killer, that she had helped him set the fire at the aquatic complex. "We did it for the rush," she told the police, and that she had slipped Cesar Allen the date rape drug and strangled him at Logger's party, then stabbed him in the back with the chef's knife to cast suspicion on Culver, the bartender. When asked for her reasons, she said she'd offered Allen's corpse to her jealous boyfriend as proof that her ex meant nothing to her, and she explained that Captain Logger had taken quick action to protect her, severing his colleague's head and leaving the note. "She described it all with the most disturbing lack of remorse I'd ever seen," said Major Bonamassa to Park and Walker, as he rose from his desk and offered them his hand. "That's it, guys. You'd better get going, or you're going to miss your flight. But I want you to know what a big help you've been. Ever thought about going into law enforcement? I'd be glad to write you a recommendation." Park and Walker did, in fact, arrive late to the airport, and at the ticketing counter they found their flight overbooked.
We only have space in first class.
The airline representative said.
But if either of you has served in the military, I can waive the upgrade fee.
They thanked the young woman profusely and sprinted for the gate, barely making it onto the plane before the door was sealed shut. Walker dropped into his seat with a long, tired sigh. This time it was soft and wide, with plenty of legroom. He pulled out his thriller novel, which he figured he'd finish before he got home. On the other side of the aisle, Park settled into an equally plush situation. Even more plush, he discovered, as his eyes fell on the gorgeous Latina sitting beside him.
Hi,
She said, stretching out the word with a coquettish drawl.
I'm Carla Reyes.
This ends a hell of a spring break. Patrick Weill hopes you liked it. If you did, please leave him a review. And if you're hungry for more, there's a full trilogy of novels that follows this story, the Park and Walker action thriller series. Thank you for listening.